We finally have come back to a decent amount of rain. The other day we got just shy of an inch, which was enough to refill most of our rainwater collection systems. I talked about that recently around cleaning out gutters and preparing for that. A lot of folks took interest in that or are also trying to figure out storing rainwater in their landscape. In this video, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into some work we've done in our neighbor's property. So I'm walking through the gate here. Our neighbor, our good friend Ian, and I have clocked a bunch of time. Also, Juan has been working on this, and our friend Chelsea, and we've made some improvements in the earth itself in holding and distributing water. I'd like to start at the top of our collective watershed where we steward the land here and look at how we've redirected some overflow, held on to some of it high in the landscape, and then gave an opportunity to pull water from lower in the landscape. So the last video is about holding water in containers. This is about holding and being able to pull water from the landscape. We'll come back to down here in a little bit, but this is basically the low end of the property, and this is where water leaves. If it leaves here down to the road, it's gone. It's on its way to picking up road contaminants and going to the lake, which is not ideal. The more we can pull out of the overflow states and store it in the earth, store it in the root systems of plants and the leaves of plants, the better. But here we are at the bottom of the watershed. Just as a reference, we'll come back and look at this in more detail, but I'm going to begin up at the top. Up here at the top of the landscape, conveniently, is this pretty large barn of our neighbors. I've talked about this in the past, setting up this rainwater collection system off the roof. Before the rain the other day, the water line was right around there. Now it's up to here, times 6, which means well over 1,000 gallons of water has been accumulated. In fact, we need to think about an overflow for these that sends the water to the pond. So that section, that approach has been working pretty well. Gutters are functioning well enough. But like I said, this is more about what's happening in the earth itself. I had talked a little ways back around an experiment where I was hand digging out a retention space in this drainage ditch to hold on to water after rain. So this is dug out a ways back by our neighbor in order to help make sure that water can leave from the other side of the barn. We have yet to put gutters on this side of the roof. They'll be useful. Certainly more tanks can be over here. But this is the south side of the barn, and there's a hill going up slope here without any ditch. This is where the ditch is. Without any ditch, the water would be pushing up against the barn and creating lots of freezing issues. Still more grading and work and thoughtfulness around water storage and water redirection back in here. But basically, here's this ditch that after rains runs pretty thoroughly. Now in this case, we're not seeing a lot. There's a little bit right there, and there's some springs and seeps, which I may have mentioned in the past, coming out of the hillside right in there. In fact, we look up slope here on our north-facing slope, so I'm looking south, and there's a tremendous amount of high clay content woodland upslope of here until we get to the top of the hill. So a lot of accumulating water. 1 inch of rain tends to beget a lot of water moving through the landscape. You wouldn't know it here because the trickle is quite slow, but what I was talking about in the past video around hand digging a little bit of a berm or a dam is to say, well, fundamentally, if there's a pulse moment and a lot of water needs to leave, we need to keep this open. So we don't want to impound this entire thing. But when we get below the water level that's needed to protect the barn, we might as well hold on to some of that water while it's still high in the landscape and pull it with the pump or hand tools, or even make a siphon out of it. And so I started hand digging this. He came through with his machine once the proof of concept seemed sound and made quite a solid berm here. So basically it was digging out this material and packing it, finding the clay in it and packing a really, really strong berm. But now this can fill and overflow and continue to do the work of going back into the ditch, but we have a pausing point, a holding point to capture all this. And all of this water is from what seems like a very, hello frog, a very, very gentle trickle. Like you barely see water down in the ditch. It does not seem like a lot, but it's continually flowing. And now This space, which goes down quite a bit, probably has 1,000, 2,000-ish gallons of water. And so now we're rigging up a very simple line, a guideline here. These are black locust staves with a wire run across. There's a pump that will be tied off with paracord off of this wire with a little buoy, so it follows the water line and we can lift water into our tanks. This is a very low cost pump. You can get equivalents of this for $15 to $20 online, and it runs directly off of a solar panel. Right now, sitting in the mud, it's not the best. It's not the best for the pump. It's also not the best for water clarity. So we had it just laying in the bottom, but there's lots of muck and silt there. We'll do an update video on the next level with this, but we were waiting to actually see some water in here. With the rains that come in today, it'll be interesting to see how much more this accumulates. But it seems like it's continually increasing in height, and we want to capture that water, send it across the landscape into our storage containers. It'll go into the first container, and then that'll equalize into the rest. And then we can have the overflow send down along and into our pond, which is down over there. Really promising how much water can be held this high in the landscape. Fair little bit of embodied energy for sure to have the tractor do the work. This would be a massive undertaking physically to do it by hand, but certainly could have been doable, or could have been a smaller scale by hand but repeated more often. But he has his machine here, he's into doing it, he's really good at doing it, so it makes sense. But let's go down the watershed. So the ditch continues in that unmowed area in here. Normally what would happen after a rain like what we had the other day is this entire ditch would just be running. It is gently accumulating water and moving, but what would have been running water through here is still capturing up higher in the landscape in that little pond. So we're charging the battery, so to speak, of the perched water hold higher up. That will certainly crest if we get a bunch more rain, but it's really nice to store and charge the battery first before it runs through. This area we may end up opening a bit more so we can have some space for rice that was started. You can see little paddies in here, but this could be evolved quite a bit more. But this still could take on quite a bit more water. We come down a little further, we can look at some garden bed areas. This is where I was talking about using wood chips to suppress the lawn, which is still doing a nice job. And down in this area, we get closer to where last year we had air prune boxes set up in this spot. A link here to the video talking about that setup. And the air prune boxes have since been moved up into the lawn, up in the landscape. But we were working with a little space here, which the other day looked like this, which was functional. It was nice, but also relatively small amount of water holding. And so I used the backhoe on Ian's tractor to do some primary digging, a little bit of initial digging, put the topsoil to create a nice raised bed, which we've planted out to winter squash and green beans. And then our friend Chelsea and Juan worked on doing some detail work in here. So now we've got this little dig out where we can put a container for a pump when this fills up, which it will once the holding water up higher in the landscape is overflowing and cresting. We've got rocks in the channel to interrupt an aggressive water flow. That'll help slow down silt so that this doesn't fill in too easily. And we should have yet another little simple spot here to be able to grab water, load it into water tanks, or send it across to our high tunnel. Basically a mid-landscape water holding moment that is close enough to gardens to be helpful and convenient enough to actually skip the solar panel and the pump and just simply dip a watering can and water garden beds once this is full again. The rains have done a huge amount for helping the plants feel more vibrant and green. So appreciated. So we don't really have a ton of watering needs at the moment, but still always worthwhile to be refilling and storing and thinking about how to be holding more water for later, because this won't necessarily last. We'll get dry again. And here we are a little further down. Now this is the last chance to really capture and hold water in a meaningful way before it leaves to the road. As you can imagine, this was just a standard ditch, and Ian was down for more creative modifications to the landscape. We identified this concrete box, which to the best of our understanding, is probably the confluence of a few French drains. There's a few pipes that run in from here that logically go back towards the corners of the home if we chase them out in a straight line. And so what we can do in this case is we're pulling from here with a tiny little 12-volt pump. Very, very simple little pump direct from a solar panel. And that's what fills the metal tank. The overflow of the metal tank goes to the hole I looked at just before, and then we can deliver water from the bottom of the tank over to that high tunnel. All of that's happening with just 9 watts of energy, which is absolutely amazing. But we identified that this whole container is relatively leaky, which is fine. It's good to return the water to the landscape, but it was leaking out into the ditch here. And so Ian went through with his backhoe and harvested out. We moved the topsoil, as I talked about before, to develop these garden beds across the street, across the driveway. A lot more sun over there, nice garden potential. And then got into the clay a little bit lower and created a really simple berm. And now we have another many hundreds of gallons of water space here. The really nice thing about this is it's convenient to pull my truck right up to this, and then I can use a solar panel and a pump to fill a tank or to fill containers on my truck, so we can deliver water to a field down the way that has no well, has no infrastructure, no roof line, nowhere to collect water. So the other day we planted hundreds of cabbages and tomatoes, and we used the water from this ditch in order to irrigate them. We just eyeballed the dam, and he built this out with the tractor. There's a little bit of an error or an issue that the dam, the overflow state is over across the middle of the dam, which is not ideal. The stakes aren't super high because it's not a massive rate of flow. But if we don't repair that, we could have this easily be cut and blown out. In fact, you can see the water. Basically, that rate of flow represents water that if we weren't pulling it from here and putting it into the greenhouse or watering air prune boxes or soaking into the landscape, this rate of flow is waste. It's not the worst. It was what was happening before, but now that we can see it, we're more interested in capturing that and holding it. So I'll go through when I'm feeling it, probably with some bare feet and a slotted shovel, and dig out some of this really hydrated, very clay-dominant soil at the edge, tidy up this ledge system, maybe make a step down into this water so I can dip a bucket easily, and take that mud and clay, continually pack it into that spot and stomp it in, and keep doing so until we see the overflow come across this spillway. And once we know that the water here is gently coming across here, which will bring this berm up a few inches, which will mean many hundreds more gallons of water, the spillway can then be shielded with a ton of stones so that when water really wants to rush through, it's interrupted and the scouring, erosive force of the water is minimized by the stones. Once we know it's doing that properly and returning, we can then flank this and fill it with calamus and water iris, filter feeding plants that are aquatic tolerant or aquatic happy, that can do the root work to lock the stones together. All of this is an iterative process. All this is designed on the fly as we go. And you can see why I'm wandering a little bit back towards the house, is that the rains are starting up again, which means I'm going to be back inside working on some other things. But then when there's a break, I'll come out again and look at what is the rate of flow over that berm. Let me adjust it, let me pack it, let me observe the overflow. Let me look at the space up higher in the landscape. How much is that increasing in water? How much can we pull from that concrete basin with it not drawing down? How can we redirect the overflow in meaningful ways? Lots of observe and interact to be done. The great news is that none of it has to happen all at the exact same time. And so I can free choice come out in the rain or go inside for a little bit. I'm gonna opt for going inside for a little bit, have some more coffee, think about some other work. Hope where you are, you're getting rains that are appropriate and saturating and lovely, and that things are growing in beautiful ways in your life. Take care.